Well, here I am, gin and tonic in hand, and wearing the shirt, I think the same shirt in the notorious Last Supper photo that is perhaps going to be published in Pari Perspectives at some stage and will be the end of my professional career. I've just been lecturing for 4 hours about non-local mind. And I was experimenting with non-local audio as well, because I left my radio mic on when I went to the toilet and returned to this audience in uproar of laughter. And I just said, oh, that's performance art, but there's no extra charge. Of course, non-local is just a posh word for all over the place, which frankly is how I feel at the moment. So rather than chancing too much improvisation, what I'm going to do is read to you, but probably go off on tangents, the article that I have written for this celebratory 20th anniversary issue of Pari Perspectives, called Pathway to Pari, plagiarizing from a rather well-known author. And it's really a little potted history of my relationship with Pari. So, if you will indulge me, I'll kick off. One of the threads running through David Peat's writing is non-linearity, especially the potential for apparently small events to trigger significant changes. This humbling yet liberating truth has manifested many times in my own life. I know people who think they plan their lives. All the big changes in my life have just happened from random little tipping points, bifurcation points, if you like. But not least in 1989, when a visiting professor, his name was Jim Mathers, as I recall, at the university where I was employed in wind energy research, lent me a copy of Looking Glass Universe. This reawakened in me what Rachel Carson so memorably called the sense of wonder. It was a sort of, with tip of the hat to Woody Allen, everything you always wanted to know about science, but were afraid to ask experience. Best of all, it did so without the arcane mathematics that, despite my own doctorate in applied physics, have been forever beyond my grasp. I take it that Basil Hiley hasn't joined us today, which is a pity, because I wanted to tell him that I was so inspired by the Bohm lectures that I went out and bought The Undivided Universe, and then I opened it and freaked out completely, because basically it's like this, and I don't know what the hell, I don't know what that's about at all. So, never without initiative, I've been out and bought this for myself, so that I hope somehow or other I can make some kind of sense of it.
Says the physicist.
I could only dream of meeting David, which took well over a decade to happen, but other events unfolded meanwhile. For example, I was struck by a coincidence, which doesn't meet all my criteria for a synchronicity, when my climbing partner and I were drying our clothes in a laundrette in Grenoble after a forced retreat from a mountain. Perched uncomfortably atop the washing machines, I was reading a biography of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he was reading Science, Order and Creativity, when almost simultaneously, certainly without further page turning, we discovered that David Bohm and Krishnamurti knew each other. I subsequently encountered Bohm in a class at Brockwood School when I was considering teaching physics there. My maths must have been better then, or else I must have been more deluded then. I certainly couldn't teach physics now. This must have been near the end of his life. I digress and regress only to convey a personal sense of implicate order, an invisible web of interconnection in time and space, before we all got hooked up on the explicate worldwide variety. I shouldn't be too dismissive of the internet, however, for thanks to it, I discovered the Pari Center, which was now temptingly close, as in 2001, I had moved to Switzerland to train as a Jungian analyst. My first trip to Pari was to attend David's New Science, New Paradigms course in July 2003 with my Jungian colleague, Brian Stevenson. By now, I was somewhat in awe of David, and therefore apprehensive about meeting the great man. my moniker, not his. I'm happy to report that my anxiety immediately evaporated thanks to his warmth, unpretentiousness and sense of humour. I clearly shared the last of these, as we were perhaps the only two people in Pari who found Viz magazine funny. And Maureen, I haven't forgotten, you have promised me David's Viz magazine collection, which may still be in the toilet, I don't know, when I next come to Pari. I'm going to hold you to that promise. What most impressed me about David intellectually were the breadth of his interests and knowledge, a contemporary Renaissance man if ever there was one, and his endless curiosity and creativity. I quickly realised that the Pari Center was very much a family affair as I got to know Maureen and Eleanor, and I guess little James as well. I might as well embarrass while I'm at it. Oh, hasn't he grown? Anyway, an integral part of Pari, the Pari Center was also an integral part of a special village community. To this day, and my shame, my spoken Italian remains almost non-existent. I speak a little Spanish and it's too similar. It just muddles me up horribly, and you can't teach an old dog new tricks anyway. Yet I've always been made to feel welcome by the residents of Pari. The place is an island of sanity in a world gone mad, an inspiring microcosm and a feast for head, logos, heart, eros, and stomach, the two magpies. Grazie mille. What a place. I returned alone to Pari in April 2006 for some mentoring from David with the Jungian diploma thesis I was writing. We delved deep into the Pari Library, which, though modest in size, surely has the highest proportion of interesting books of any collection I've encountered. As we say in Switzerland, klein aber fein. David introduced me to deep ecology and the philosophy of Arne Naess, for which I'm eternally grateful. My thesis eventually resulted in a book, Gaia, Psyche and Deep Ecology, Navigating Climate Change in the Anthropocene. Oh, guess what? Time for product placement. There it is, everyone. Which was a joint winner of the Scientific and Medical Network 2019 Book Prize. I say that not to brag, or a little bit maybe, but I met David Lorimer, who's Programme Director of the Scientific and Medical Network and editor of Paradigm Explorer, for the first time at the Science of Consciousness 2019 conference. And we shared fond memories of David and of Pari. And of course, David moderated, I think, the Pari discussion after the first screening of Infinite Potential. That man reads, what, 12 books a week? How? Anyway, my last encounter with David Peat at Pari was when my wife, Yuriko Sato, who's going to reappear in a minute, a Japanese Jungian analyst who I'd met in Switzerland, and I attended his synchronicity course in September 2010. We corresponded occasionally thereafter until 2015, and I was greatly saddened to hear of David's illness and of his death in 2017. Which moved me to write a brief obituary on my website. And that ended with, quote, our shared interest in holistic physics and Jungian psychology produced some rich interactions. He could be very funny too. His David Bohm impersonations, for example, were a treat. I mean, they used to double me up. However, somehow I hope that wherever David has gone, he hasn't had all his questions answered. I miss him. Thanks to Maureen, Eleanor, Shantana, and many others, David's legacy, and more importantly, his spirit, lives on in Pari. Yuriko and I returned there in 2018 to attend Shantana's Pilgrimages to Emptiness, Rethinking Reality Through Quantum Physics seminar. And again in 2019 as presenters in the Re-Enchanting the World Narratives of Wholeness June Dialogue. We were scheduled to present at this year's June Dialogue, What is Consciousness? But it was postponed to 2021 for reasons we're all too familiar with. Meanwhile, everyone involved with Pari deserves congratulations for adapting to these tragic and challenging times with a full programme of online events via Zoom, not least the release of the Infinite Potential film and related lectures. I'm nearly at the end, you'll be pleased to know. Lest all of this sounds too much like a eulogy, as a good Jungian, I must ask, where is the shadow? My impression of both David and the whole Pari project is that they have striven for wholeness rather than perfection. As anyone else who has proofread David's manuscripts knows. But since that is also the goal of individuation in the Jungian sense, I find it hard to quibble with. Indeed, as Shantana wrote in the original I Ching Oracle, it is on the edge between order and chaos that the subtle dance of life takes place. Pari has flourished on just that edge. Long may it continue to do so.
Wow, Andrew, that was fantastic. The power of storytelling is definitely an amazing talent you have. And I've seen nodding, I've seen tears, I've seen a lot of things happening. And I think many people also recognize some elements of your story in their own stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then Jenna, may I invite you? Can you now turn everything off?
Hi, everybody. How are you? Oh, I have white wine. Cheers. It's so beautiful to see you all. Cheers. This is Julie. Eleanor's over
Early
here.
still here. Although for the occasion, I could make an exception.
I promise I will not be as eloquent as Andrew, just to make Manfred feel better. So let's see. I've been coming to Pari for 20 years, which is hard to believe. The only evidence I have of change are the Peat kids. The Barbary Peat kids are no longer, they don't like it when you hold them like this anymore, which I find offensive. Let's see. I first came here after 2 years of studying on my own in a really inarticulate, disorganized, messed up manner. I was looking at the intersectionality of Eastern thought and quantum physics, and I felt very alone with seeing intersectionality until I happened upon a copy of What is Enlightenment magazine, in which the relationship of Krishnamurti and Bohm was made known to me. And I was so excited. Finally, I found my people. I'm going to go talk to these guys. But as you all probably know, 22 years ago, they had both already left this plane. And so I was stuck with the random guy who was being interviewed in the magazine, this David Peat fella. So email was like kind of a new thing. That's embarrassing, but it's true. And so I found his email address and sent an email off and was just shocked and dumbstruck when David Peat responded to me. Oh my God. And so when I was told about the first course that was being offered, of course, I jumped on the chance to come out, and it was everything I hoped it would be. David Peat brought the books that I had read in preparation just to life in such a human way, as you all know so well that he was able to do. So this, from certainty to uncertainty was suddenly this alive, rich, beautiful journey through the history of Western consciousness. Like, are you kidding me? And of course, he was hilarious and ornery as hell. I have two memories that were my strongest. It's weird how the brain is. The weirdest of memories. One is Peter Herring. Hey, Peter, good to see you. Walking us down to the river and stone balancing. And I see stones balanced at the river now every day. And I can't help but think of you and 20 years ago. And I'm just transported back in time. And the other memory that just for some reason is so lively when I think of 20 years ago, it's so stupid. But you know, David Peat had this like hippie man bag, you know, that like woven purse thing that he would not ever put down. So I'm sure he had a great reason to need to get away from these annoying students. But as soon as class would end, he would run to his house with his man bag flapping behind him. And when you're like, David, where are you going in such a hurry? His answer was, I'm going to take a nap. So that is my memory of 20 years ago. The most active person I've ever seen running to take a nap. But the strange thing that happened to me during that time is that the way that he brought this material to life was so palpable that I left that class 20 years ago with a film in my mind's eye. Never having been a filmmaker, never having had an intention to be a filmmaker, I could see it in my mind's eye. And for the last 20 years, I have been making that film called Absurdity of Certainty. And it is still in the process of becoming and unfolding. And a lot of you have helped so tremendously on this path and on this journey, including David in his death. I've seen old emails and been like, oh, that's what he was trying to tell me. Oh, God. So that's all I know for sure, is that every time I've come here, I know much less than I knew the previous time that I've come here. And hopefully one day soon I'll be able to share Absurdity of Certainty with you all. And just thank you all so much for being a part of this community. And just feeling so much love and thrilled to be here. So to David. And I yield the balance of my time.
But not to Manfred.
Oh, thank you so much. I think some of us already had the enormous opportunity to see one version of Absurdity of Certainty here in Pari on the piazza. And it has been transformed since then, so I'm curious to see it again. But it would be fantastic and a celebration if one day we can see it in its next version. Because I think it's a lifelong project.
It'll take its final shape soon.
So thank you, Jenna. Thank you. And Leila, are you? Yes, please.
I am here, and I will cheer you all with coffee because it's morning here in California. And I'm so, so grateful to be here. This is an amazing community. Thank you for the invitation. And congratulations to Pari Center, 20 years of amazing work. So I'd like to share a little bit from a piece I wrote for the Pari Perspectives. I first met David Peat many years ago through an online PhD program. He was teaching a class called Art, Science, and the Sacred, which appealed to me as a combination of subjects with a potentially interesting intersection. The course title was intriguing, as was the syllabus, the reading material, and above all, its creator, Dr. F. David Peat. Trained as a theoretical physicist, it was clear from the beginning that his broad-ranging interests could not be captured in a narrow silo of knowledge. He could see interrelationships among many kinds of information and knowledge, each expanding and enriching the others. I'm a longtime practitioner of Sufism, which is an inner path of self-knowledge, and I've always had a strong interest in the sciences. My curiosity was piqued by the intersection of scientific and spiritual approaches to understanding the nature of existence, and this is where I wish to focus my academic efforts in my PhD program. At first, I wasn't sure how to frame a topic, in a way that was conducive to academic research and writing. But by the end of my first semester, I knew I wanted to work with David if he would have me as his student. With his solid background and practice in theoretical physics and deep appreciation for spirituality and arts, I could see great potential, if only he could see some potential in me, especially considering that I had no background in physics beyond a few stray classes. But I had sincere interest, especially in quantum behavior, about which I knew a little, very little. So I traveled to Italy to take a course with David at the Pari Center. I met David and Maureen and Eleanor and all the beautiful residents of Pari and the fascinating people who come from all over the world for courses there. To be in Pari is to take a step out of time, away from the usual place and pace of life, to be surrounded by fresh air, peace and quiet, wonderful fresh food farmed from just outside the village, to make a trek up the steep stone steps to the center at the top of the hill, visiting the nearby agriturismo. These memories will forever be in my heart, entangled with the mind and heart-opening lectures, discussions, and informal sessions that form the Pari courses that David conceived and led. I will recall with pleasure the joys of summer evenings in the piazza, with the men seated on one side, the women on the other, and the children of all ages playing together in the middle, sometimes tempting the adults to join in their games. And I'll recall with special fondness the soups at the midday meals that David made himself. So what are David's qualities that I particularly treasure? His open approach to knowledge, encouraging everyone present to share experiences, impressions, and points of view. His generous spirit and devotion to learning, both his own and that of others, came through again and again as we worked together. He helped me find and evaluate reading materials. He even offered to let me browse his own collection. He connected me with experts to help in my work, people I wouldn't otherwise know or have access to, including his colleague, Shantana Sabadini, who became a member of my committee. David was always there when I needed to talk with him, to clarify physics concepts, to sort out other confusions in the subject matter, and to help me corral the truly massive amount of information I was gathering. One day when I urgently needed his advice, he even took a break from his grandson's birthday party to chat with me via Skype. Somehow David had continuing faith in me, for which I am forever grateful. On the day I defended my dissertation, I felt truly humbled when David accorded me the respect that I would not have the temerity to claim, saying that I was the expert on my focus topic. Each time I visited Pari, I feel more comfortable, more welcome, and more enchanted. I've learned the schedule of the visiting merchants, the bus schedule to Siena, and even, and this is crucial, the locations of convenient doorways to pop into when the cars come barreling down the narrow roads. Who knew? One little road in this teeny little town, and they still drive like Italians. And I even brushed up on my rusty Italian so I could speak a little with the delightful ladies who prepared our breakfast every morning. Since completing my degree, I've continued my practice of Sufism. I've continued reading. I've continued traveling, including a few visits to Pari. And I'm sad that the current global pandemic has curtailed my ability to plan a travel to Pari now. But on the other side, I'm delighted that these circumstances led to the creation of the summer series of lectures focused on the life and work of David Bohm. We lose the in-person experience in sharing the joys of being together in Pari, but we gain the ability to gather from around the world over many weeks, and here we are once again celebrating 20 years. Having seen the director's cut of the film Infinite Potential, I understood straight away why I was drawn to David Peat and the question he gave me for my dissertation, which came from David Bohm. In a flash of inspiration, I heard my Sufi teachers in the description of David Bohm's understanding of wholeness and the implicate and explicate orders. As I process this further, I can visualize continuing progress on the book I long to write to share my experience and understanding in the hopes that it too may bring some light and inspiration to others. Building on the work of those giants upon whose shoulders I am privileged to stand. David Peat is among them. Thank you, David. I am forever grateful for having the opportunity to know you and work with you, and for your patience in working with me. I wish I could talk with you now about my reflections on that film. Perhaps we'll meet for discussion in the wholeness. And I hope someday we'll all meet for further discussion in the wholeness. Thank you.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. Even today, as we were living up to this call, so many memories came back. What would be my story? And I had the same, as you said, like, I so wish I could talk to David today. And I think many of us have. And I must say, the way you described the village and the villagers and the life here, that was just beautiful. And it's so recognizable. So that was wonderful. Thank you very much. And then the next speaker is Manfred. And Manfred, I think we met the first time I came to Pari in 2007. Yes. But I don't know whether that was your first time. So
I can't remember, but I think we had an appointment in Siena, but you didn't show up. That I can remember because you're
I'm happy that I leave such good memories.
because your plane was late. So, or your train.
Oh, that's a great excuse, man.
Yes, and I had to do the way to Pari alone. So
I apologize if I didn't do
Thank you. But can I start with a question? So should I start with the bad stories or the good stories?
Bad, please. Bad, definitely.
Behave,
okay.
Manfred, please.
Okay, the bad was one with you or with Jenna. No, I think I start with a good one. And this is a story. It's a very, very little story, but for me, it shows what the character of Pari is. It was on the last evening in 2017, I think, and I asked Jenny, always mix it up, Jenny, to get some oil, some cans of oil, and it was 11 in the night, and she said, "Oh, I can't do it. I will put the oil before your door next morning," because we went out at 5 a.m. And I asked, "And how do I pay it?" And she said, "So next time when you will come." And that is for me wonderful. It's trust. And it even now it touches me again. Could you imagine a shop worldwide who is acting like that? I know. So that is one of the stories. And when I came, when I came the first time, I was scheduled to arrive at 5 p.m. and I arrived at 11:30 in the night. And I will ever remember David Peat's action to help me, to wait for me, and even to carry my luggage to this small hotel at the time. And that is the other part, caring for the people. And it's so seldom in the world, and I think it's so unique, this place. So I could tell you hundreds of stories, but what also touched me was one day after breakfast, a 9-year-old girl asked me, "Can I show you Pari?" And I said yes, and she did it, and it was quite an experience to see it from a perspective of a little girl. And after that, we had a session in the Palazzo, and I didn't walk up, I ran up with an 85-year-old lawyer. It's unbelievable. So that is Pari for me. And then we had double slit experience, quantum entanglement, and so on. And one day I asked Gentina, what is it with these black holes? We could even have a green cow. And he answered, I thought he will answer now, said stupid. I said, yes, but I studied physics. So it's really great. The book of Basil Haley is also a story. I bought it once. I didn't understand nothing at all, because all the formulas. And the stupid thing is, I forgot that I have bought it. And last year, his speech again, I bought it again, and I didn't understand it. But I think that also is part. And let me read a part of what I wrote for this event here. And okay, because my English is not so good, I cannot express it. So Pari brings for me together the feeling of being home, warm and convenient in an ancient village with its traditional workflow and highly sophisticated people from over the world. It is like sitting in a cozy little room with huge open windows, letting in knowledge and that what is beyond, sometimes both in the same moment. So the heart of Pari might already be shown in its name, meaning in balance with the inhabitants, the lecturers, the organizers, the guests, the surrounding nature, and its inherent spirituality, for life as an undivided organism. I'm so grateful being occasionally a part of this unique center, which is for me the manifestation of think global, act local. Thank you.
Beautiful, Manfred, thank you. Again, I saw smiles, laughter, tears, everything together in one circle that we are somehow today. And I recognize, I mean, usually people are not attracted to something they don't understand. But I kind of, in Pari, I could really sit at a lunch table in between scientists who are scribbling formulas on their placemats and truly being happy, not having any idea what that conversation was about, and yet feeling somehow at home. So I recognize that Pari has the power. And Dave Schramm, you said you had days of stories to tell. So we're looking forward which ones you picked.
Well, I also said that they were mostly stories that should not be told in public.
This is not public, Dave. This is not public.
Yes, so yeah, I was going to just pop off a few stories, but I see that people are reading their pieces, and I think I'll do that and maybe intersperse it with a few things. Now, mine is not really a story of the 20 years of Pari. You know, I visited a few times later on. And so here you're getting the backstory of David Peat as a hippie character who migrated to Canada from Liverpool in 1965. And a young, innocent, straight fellow from a small Northern Ontario mining village who became his, first of all, master's student and then doctoral student. So this is a bit of a story of a relationship. And maybe I'll intersperse it with with a few, little stories here and there. But yeah, I think maybe then, since other people are reading, I'd like to read this off. So, so these are the early years of David Peat. I first glimpsed him in a long hallway with labs and offices on either side, a thin figure in a three-piece suit. He hurried in a scurrying sort of way, bent forward, peering this way and that. His face held in a hint of a grin. He had hair then, a sprawl of black wispy tusks, Einsteinian style. An odd fellow, I thought. It would not have occurred to me that soon we would become friends. So David Peat had come from the University of Liverpool to do postdoctoral studies with quantum theorist R.J.C. Brown, Rupert Julian Chalice Brown, at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. It was late 1965. I was an undergraduate working to complete a BSc in 1966. A requirement was to arrange to work on a project with a departmental professor for the final semester. So I applied to the quantum theorist, Julian Brown. He passed me off to his postdoc, a guy called Dave Peat, in what would for me be a life-changing connection. I was a bit nonplussed by this. I thought, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? This strange character scurrying around the halls, peering this way and that, leering and so on. Anyhow, so I was passed to David Peat in what would for me be a life-changing connection. Yeah, David was easygoing and accepting. He was interesting to be with, always interesting to be with. He always had just so much going on, projects. I mean, all the time that I knew him. And he invited me to tea at his home with his wife, his first wife, Frances. And he insisted that I call him Dave, not Dr. Peat. We talked and laughed and we enjoyed each other's company. So the following autumn, the autumn following graduation, I returned to Queen's to begin graduate studies in infrared spectroscopy with a Dr. Gus Chervell, because David's postdoctoral placement would have ended by then, and he would have left Kingston to find a new position. Now, as a new computing center had been completed over the summer, I was keen to see it. So as I mounted the steps up to the building, David was coming down. We stopped midway, both surprised, both smiling. Now, actually, this was it was kind of like a love at second sight meeting. It was very, we just stood there and grinned at each other for a while. And anyhow, so Dave's postdoc placement would have ended. He would have been gone, yes. So as I mounted the few steps up to the building, David was coming down. We stopped midway, both surprised, both smiling. He'd been offered a position at Queen's, he explained. I said that I'd come back to do a master's with Dr. Chervell. We stood talking, our conversation dancing shyly around the obvious possibility. So soon David had arranged for me to be freed from my previous commitment and to switch to graduate studies with him as my supervisor. The beginning friendship of the year before quickly became an established bond. So now we're going to enter into the scene that I entered into becoming a student of David Peat. I thought it would be physicists and mathematicians. It was not. So quantum physics was my formal education. Being with David was an education of another sort. I'd come from a small town in Northern Ontario with 1950s values. David was of Liverpool in the 1960s. A friend of his knew the early Beatles. His Kingston social circle was a melange of artists, poets, musicians, maybe occasional mathematician, a lot of countercultural misfits and long-haired hippie girls. He was interested in everything that was created and in everyone whose lifestyle or research pushed conventional limits. there were plenty of parties. For me, a world opened. Now, I mean, some of the people, one was an aspiring young actress who eventually married the president of a chapter of the notorious Satan's Choice motorcycle gang. Another was a rather mad Austrian woman who lived in a bank vault from a converted old bank, whose father had been a Nazi commander of a concentration camp. Another was a fellow who, in a reconstructed building with very high ceilings, who lived on the shelf of somebody's kitchen. The ceilings were very high, and there was a high shelf that was big enough for a sleeping bag, a duffel bag at his feet, and a can of tobacco, which were all his needs. And he had a ladder up between the stove and the refrigerator, and he nailed a little curtain there, and that was where he lived. And the funniest of all, and this was only temporary, was a friend of mine who became later a friend of mine, who lived again in a reconstructed building, and it didn't have a bathroom in his apartment, but it had a huge bathroom down the hall, which was his, with bathtub and toilet, sink, so on, all over in one corner. Well, one of these characters had no place to live, and so he asked if he could live in my friend's bathroom. So when poor old DC went in there to use the toilet, here was Steve in the bathtub, nested in a pile of pillows, radio on, reading his book, and so on. Well, these are some of the strange people. But then he was very much involved with people who ran art, directed art galleries, musicians, very much theater, and so on. He was, and so he was really an incredible counterculturalist, and he liked all these people, and it was a very interesting experience being around David Peat, I can tell you. So anyhow, he drew me into his love of jazz, modern art, and beat writers. This was the days before the hippies were properly established, but there were beatniks. He would read aloud poetry of Allen Ginsberg and William Carlos Williams, and would pass on to me writings by William Burroughs. He loved to play from his massive collection of trad jazz, grinning, bobbing his head, or to ease into smooth strains of cool jazz. Sometimes the mood would have him spin chaotic jazz. And on occasion, we would make trips to Toronto, sometimes with his wife, Frances, to sit in dimly lit hotel bars or smoky jazz clubs, to sip sherry and to nod together to the beat. My contribution to our creativity in our early years was mostly on a different plane, perhaps less exciting to most, but not to us, our field of work, quantum theory. The fact that this theory worked, despite the fact that this theory worked, it didn't make rational sense, I would say. People got used to its illogic logic and got over feeling confused simply by familiarity which numbed them, not by rational understanding. Now here it was David who held to conventional thinking. He disagreed with my criticism. I disagreed with his disagreement. So often we would be at, I would be at the Peats to have tea and biscuits with David and Frances. She would talk about wine and cheeses and travel, and David and I would quietly listen. Then after a while, a discussion on physics and its understanding would break out. David and I would become animated, our voices louder and louder, gesticulating and so on. And Frances would settle back on the sofa. She would have a cigarette, she would take a long, slow, occasional drag on this, and she would gaze at us quizzically, as if to convey that she was surveying strange beings. Sometimes she said as much. So in time, I converted David to scientific heresy, as he had me to countercultural life. It was not a difficult task for either of us. We just stirred to life in the other things that were already present. So following from our heretical thought, David soon became deeply engaged in exploring the foundations of physics. I was slogging away on my thesis, but he was, he just left me behind. He went roaring right ahead. And he was always one to contact people, you know, famous people, and get involved with them. He got involved with Wheeler, who was Feynman's thesis advisor, and so on. And anyhow, he got very deeply into this. And so anyhow, as a consequence of all this, soon after I completed my doctorate, we both were in England. He had arranged that I do postdoctoral studies under, and he spent sabbatical time with a, quote, we'd heard, maverick physicist, I remember that quote, whose name was David Bohm. And this encounter would be life-changing and course-setting for both of us. So now, David was fun. He was always fun, and he was irreverent. He was always up to something. He was engaged in projects, and he was engaged in an awful lot of tomfoolery also. So anyhow, when I think of David, I think very much of someone who was playful and who did not respect conventions of propriety. I recall in our early years an occasion when I was doing late evening calculations on the university's chest freezer-sized, state-of-the-art IBM 1620. I guess that's 1620K. That was a huge machine, big computing power at that time. So to make use of my time, while sitting by the machine, its banks of amber lights trembling, I was reading research papers in the journal Anecdotes der Physik, these great, huge, fat German volumes of physics papers, when a tapping came at the computing center's broad glass window. A face showed in the half-light outside the darkness through the bright reflections of the room's interior, and I went to the front door to unlock it to Francis and David. They had brought me hot tea and a thermos, having had theirs at home. We chatted a bit, and then David and I conducted experiments in angular momentum. One of us would sit in the console swivel chair, pulled back from the computer, and with arms outstretched, a massive copy of Anecdotes der Physik in each hand, we would be spun by the other. Then, like a figure skating, you know, wanting to increase revolutions, we would draw our arms in and spin at high speed, trying to keep from being flung by the chair, from the chair. There was silliness and laughter. I mean, this is life with David Peat. So David's play and his creativity, which went with it, they really never stopped. In the years after I'd completed my postdoc studies, when David had moved to Ottawa and I to Sudbury, I would make regular pilgrimages to visit him and his new partner, Maureen, in their home. Almost always he was engaged in some new sort of creative activity. On one occasion, using a script he had written, he was making a movie, working with volunteer actors, filming amongst stone ruins of the grounds of the Mackenzie King estate. On another, he was at home playing with an advanced toy electronics set. Once he displayed a stone sculpture he had made, and on a different occasion was proud to show me a poured metal casting he had done on an evening course. I remember him firing up a toy steam engine he had brought when researching the Industrial Revolution, delighting in its flywheel as it spun to a sputtery throb. I also remember that fiddling with it, he got the burning fuel out on the kitchen counter and had to put out the fire. But once or twice I heard him play the violin scratchily. You remember that, Eleanor? He accompanied you at some kind of recital. I couldn't believe it. This man who hadn't played a violin well ever, and probably who hadn't played it for 2 decades. Eleanor, you were at a dance recital, were you, or something? And so David Peat was there in his 3-piece suit, scratching away at this, and Eleanor was doing her dance. It was...
Eleanor.
Yeah, Eleanor. Yeah, you remember that. It was quite a phenomenon. He was entirely unembarrassed. He was always unembarrassed. Oh my God, I don't know how anyone could be so sort of out there and unembarrassed. I remember on an occasion, he was invited to give a lecture at the University of Marseille. on science and philosophy, but they said you have to do it in French. Now, David did not know one word of French, and this was to come up in 3 months. And he said, yes, I'll do it. And so he didn't have much money at the time. And so he hired a tutor to meet him once a week for, I think, about 10 weeks. And I think he got someone to translate his paper. Anyhow, I don't know whether the French understood it or not, but he got his trip to Marseille, which he so dearly wanted. I mean, he was not afraid. He was always out there. I remember telling me in his student days, he wrote a letter to the great philosopher Bertrand Russell and arranged to have tea with him. I remember also, Dave was so interested in jazz, he made acquaintance with the famous jazz musician Dave Brubeck. And whenever Dave Brubeck was performing within maybe a couple hundred miles of where David lived, free tickets would arrive in the mail. And you probably all who know anything about jazz have heard of the jazz great Stefan Grappelli. Well, Dave Peat made contact with him, and one night, late night and far into the early hours of the morning, Stefan and Dave toured all the hot spots in Paris. So, and there's more to that story, but we'll maybe let that go. Anyhow, yeah, and he made sure he met people. Two of the last surviving greats in quantum theory, the Nobelists, Werner Heisenberg, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and the other father surviving, I guess, would be Paul Dirac, who is thought of as probably the greatest British physicist since Newton, and maybe second to Einstein in this more recent era. Yeah, he got to interview both of them, to talk to them. So, I mean, he was just out there. He would just do it, whatever it was, whether it was playing for Ellen or dancing, or whether it was meeting someone really famous. He was not shy. So, and always he was writing. Yeah. So this is more, there's more going on all the time. In earlier years, radio plays and radio documentary scripts. Later, mostly books. There's a story there too, which, well, anyhow, David was never one to follow form. And in one of his scripts, I guess unfortunately, he decided it would be fun to have his wife, Frances, do the voice of Einstein. And so he did this. It was broadcast over national radio on the CBC. Unfortunately, the person who hired him was removed from the CBC for lack of artistic integrity. No one thought it would go that far, but anyhow. So where are we here? So yeah, so he was writing radio plays and radio scripts, but mostly books. Sometimes as I visited, when I went to my bedroom, I would find on the pillow a copy of a scientific philosophical paper, newly published in Foundations of Physics. We still pondered, proposed, and argued this way and that about understandings in physics. I feel too that although similar in our interests, we were different and complementary. In philosophy in our early years, he leaned toward Locke and Hume, while I was inclined to Zen writings, and I was blown away by Goethe and Nietzsche. In art at that time, while I was engaged more with the conceptual aspects of Magritte and Dali, and then with the mystical in Emily Carr, and we both had much broader interests than these, of course, he took to Manet and found an enduring fascination with the experiments of Cézanne and the attempt to capture light and movement by Turner. He would just, he could, in the National Gallery, spend so much time studying Turner. I would add that David was positive. I recall once receiving from him an 8-page typewritten letter in 2 sections called Document A and Document B, fine pieces of writing. The first section brought out his positive spirit and was entitled, very ironically, very David Peat, Against Being Against. Another section entitled Honesty was simple, direct from the heart. I recall it having the Zen flavor of nature, simplicity, unbounded openness. I recall David's words, quote, me and the garden honestly, referring to the honest quality of immediacy, of immediate contact with nature, of hands in the earth. Unfortunately, my David Peat correspondence was chewed ragged and soiled by mice, and everything was discarded. I recall also how David became deeply engaged with the writings of Carl Jung. He developed an abiding interest in Jung's work, in synchronicity, in the I Ching. On a birthday, he gave me the gift of a Tarot de Marseille. I took the cards as elements of a symbolic language through which to explore thoughts and questions, but did not take on notions of it as having divinatory potentials. I'm not entirely sure, but I think David leaned further toward taking reading seriously, particularly using the I Ching, at least going as far as accepting the acausal connection principle of synchronicity. For David, his and Maureen's discovery of the village of Pari had resonances of such an acausal connection. Here, David's eclectic scope of exploration in art, music, science, philosophy, psychology, and non-Western, more earth-based forms of spirituality found free expression. Here, he and Maureen established the Pari Center for New Learning, a gift to us all. Through the center, he shared with us as co-participants his vision, his enthusiasm, his curiosity, his play. As I sit writing, a sense comes of the imp, David Peat. That's how I best remember him. You know, very creative, very impish, incredibly irreverent. So a sense comes of the imp, David Peat, with his humor, his irreverence, a feeling with which those who knew him well will resonate, which cannot help but bring a smile. Native Americans with whom he dialogued labeled David a crow, a trickster. As well, I would say that he could be rather crow-like in movement and in the way he looked about. A close female friend from Liverpool University days saw him that way. I met Dot in England. When she spoke to David, she called him Crow, with softness and affection. Now, a crow is a bird that has a brain much larger than is needed for survival tasks, the survival tasks it must perform. And with his inner capacity, it is deeply curious and gets into all sorts of foolery not practiced by its avian relatives. Perhaps the image of a crow does capture something. And so, of crow, we recall, in metaphor and with fond feeling, a sharp eye, an inquisitive beak, a playful brain, an irreverent nature. Perhaps for this brief writing, that says enough. And yes, very much we miss him. So that's early David Peat. And I mean, there are many stories, but that's a bit of background of a man who was playful in a social and humorous sense, playful in a creative sense through the arts and so on, through writing, and playful in inquiry into philosophy, into physics, and so on. Someone who had a mind which was in that sense, very free and moving, exploratory. So.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
Wow, David, that was fantastic. Now I see what you say. I could go on for days and days and days. And it's a treasure for everybody, I think, but also for me, who is way more recent into this community, to have those little glimpses in the past. Just picturing the guy on the shelves is just, we'll never forget that one. He lived on the kitchen shelf, now why not? No, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you. And I would also like to respond to the comment of Jens, who now left. But I just wanted to say, you know, some of us are here for 40 years in connected to this community and these centers, and others are recent and maybe very new. And everybody's welcome here, and everybody hears new stories, and with that, as a little glimpse into the history of what happened in this center, in this village, in David's life. But thank you very much, Dave. We have 25 minutes more, and I think there's a lot more stories into this room. And so anyone who would like to share, whether it's a moment that you've experienced in the village or with David, with the center, whether it was here in Pari or elsewhere, or how it's still serving you in your work or life, so that we maybe have a little glimpse of how it still has impact in the world, because that was one of its dreams, that gentle action would travel across the world to all of us who's ever been here, who has listened to him, had conversations. So maybe that's something that you want to share. Any story is welcome, and so you can raise your digital hand. You know, if you click on participant, there is this button, raise hand. And that is the easiest for me to see, but if that isn't working, then you can also write it in the chat. And then we will invite you that way. So who would like to share a story, a reflection? Yeah, Caroline Keen?
Yes, hi, Eleanor. It's been a long time. And I was at Schumacher. In actual fact, next January, I'm back doing the holistic science at Schumacher now again. I've been running a charity, www.stresscareuk.com, which might be of interest to people, based on earth wisdom teachings and on a lot of what I learned from David and what I've learned along the way, mainly using indigenous cultural and art, fine art, ecology stuff. And I just wanted to say, Eleanor, so I hope your village community is going all right, because I remember trying to suggest a way of a steering group, I don't know, at your art centre, and also doing a little thing with, I can't remember who it was someone from Hungary or somewhere odd. Anyway, doing a 20 count dance with her at the art centre, the old palace, I think it was. And also I remember very well the lovely ravioli down the road at the hotel. I left a picture which I painted at the little cafe. I don't suppose it's still there. I don't know if it is or not.
It is still there. It is still
oh my God. And I'm quite well known for pictures and things. My personal website is www.stonecarrier.co.uk. If anyone's interested, I don't know where they should be, but if they are, Prince Charles is definitely interested. Because it's turned out that I am, in actual fact, yes, I think I can share this in confidence with you all, that I'm the illegitimate oldest daughter of Prince Philip. And this is something which has just come to light. And so I dare say it'll make the news sooner or later. But my brother yesterday, or my half-brother yesterday, was very surprised, because of course it means I'm half-sister to Charles, an older half-sister. I'm 4 years older than him, actually, because my mother had an affair with Philip in 1944, when I was born, at the end of the war. I was born the day before Victory Day, which seemed very providential for me anyway, and for my family in England. And really, I would love to come back, Eleanor, and see you sometime. With this COVID thing, I think it's quite difficult to travel. I don't know how Italy's placed, but I know, did you have a bad time? I don't know.
No, the situation is much better now, and we would love to have you back, Caroline. It would be wonderful to have you here.
Well,
so I look forward to that in the future.
I'd want to stay with your uncle at his vineyard, his olive grove farm. Do you remember his uncle? Your uncle? who has a little farm down at the bottom of the village. Perhaps I'm not meant to say that. I don't know. I don't know. Eleanor?
Say that again.
I would like to stay with your uncle down at his little olive farm.
My father-in-law, Carlo.
I do beg your pardon. And I did a picture for him of his quinces, and I made tons of quince jelly.
Yes, I remember.
Anyway, I'm just talking about past things. And I have been training with the Harmer Institute in California, and with I'm now with Exeter University, professor of whatever it is, associated professor of psychology, and things have moved forward in my life, and I'm very grateful to all the support that I had from David and your family. So thank you for that. Okay, you have a lovely afternoon, evening, whatever it is with you. Bye.
You do.
Thank you, Caroline. Anyone else who would like to bring in a story, an insight, a moment, an idea?
Peter.
Peter Herring.
Peter, yes, please.
Yes, hello, hi. I don't really want to go into stories, but I just felt like saying that, you know, when I first met David Peat way back in the late 90s, and then joined together with Jana, joined the first seminar in 2001. And then I think I came back in 2003 or something, I forget. But for many years, I had no contact with either the Pari Center nor David Peat. And what was really quite amazing to me was when I felt really the need to come to the 2017 centenary celebration, how I was welcomed there as though I'd only been there the previous month or so. You know, it was phenomenal, you know, really great. I won't go into the reasons why I didn't have much contact from 2003 until 2017, but it was quite phenomenal, this feeling, this connectedness with the Pari Center, the people at Pari, not only the people like Maureen, Eleanor, etc., but also the other people that joined there. There is something about people who are interested in the work of the Pari Center, and in particular the work of David Peat and everything, that just brings everybody together, and we're all sort of resonating, and it's a great feeling. And I look forward to continuing to keep in touch one way or the other, and hope to be with you soon. Bye.
If I may.
Hi, Lina.
I just want to say I'm new with the Pari Center, and as I said at the beginning, I'm so excited about this. It was so funny because I'm a consultant in neuropsychosomatic, and I could explain why people would have diseases and stuff, but working with people, I realized that events were kind of obvious also. So I started searching in quantum physics, which I've been interested in a long time, but it just resurfaced. And we studied a lot of things, books, and then we felt like we needed to talk to someone. So we ended up on Shantina's book. And then we contacted him to be able to work with him because we needed to talk to someone. But while doing some research, I came across the Pari Center, of course, because of Shantina. And then I came across David Peat. And I did some research on David Peat to know who that guy was. And then I get on Jean-François Vézina's YouTube interview. You know Jean-François Vézina. He's been like going, because I'm saying it in French.
He's actually here. He's in the group with us today.
Well, hi, Jean-François. And I recognize him because he's a friend of my sister. Well, he worked with my sister. I'm like, oh my God, how odd is this? Because I'm in Montreal, right? I'm like, okay, this was so funny. And it was kind of a sign. So we started working with the Shantena, and I discovered Pari Center. And I would have loved to meet David Peat. I actually said, I want to meet this guy. And then I realized I was not anymore. And then, but I can feel him in all of you guys. And I just, if I could have gone, I would have gone. But because of but it's just later, I will. But as I said at the beginning, I feel like it is a family. It feels good to be amongst people that have this vision of what life is all about and life experience and stuff. So thank you so much. I feel very fortunate to be part of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lina, very much. And we still hope very, very much to have many occasions here to bring people here.
In Italian. So,
Beth is put up her hand.
Beth?
I said I'm fluent in Italian, so I just can't wait to go back. I lived partly in Ravenna for 6 years, and I was so close. If I would have known, I would have gone to see you guys. Oh, well, soon.
Thank you, Lina. Beth?
Yeah, so when I think about David Peat and Pari, I think of a description that he gave of Pari and what you're doing there before I ever had the idea I would go there. But he always shared it as the idea of a container. And Andrew, I also have been studying Jung for some time, so that really appealed to me, the idea of a container. But he described it as this town that was surrounded by a circular streetway, and that circularity seemed to be really important to him. But when I think about him now, having been in Pari and having been very fortunate for him to have been my mentor for quite a while, I think all those various characteristics that have been described, his zaniness, his incredible spread of topics that he was interested in, his caringness, to me, those are all qualities of Pari that make it very distinct as a container for something that I don't see other places. So I think there are other places that we could go to learn about quantum physics. I think there are other places we could go to learn about this, that, or the other. But the fact that Pari hasn't lost the capacity to put kind of the intuitive sense first, to me, that's the container, is the naturalness of human beings, the connection to Earth, the relationship orientation, and these other things come out of it. In most places where you go, all those are kind of the afterthought. And I think the fact that you have built this container based on what touches our hearts and our souls, and then enriches it or embellishes it by the science and the left brain stuff, to me, that's something that's so very, very unique to you. And I hope you never let any consultant come in and do a business plan for you and turn you into a Western place. I just really hope you always contain that deep, natural, intuitive self that I think enriches and calls us all by our heartstrings to come and be with you.
Thank you, Beth. I see a lot of nodding going on when you said that. And even today, I was listening to a couple of interviews with David, and someone asked, what is the future of the Pari Center? And he said, I don't know. And that's the good thing about it. I don't want to plan. And I think that's how it works, and how that Pari Center will always evolve that way. So thank you. Anyone else has a story to share? James?
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm in the Pari perspectives as well. I've written an essay as well, so I thought I'd share that. Because everyone sort of wrote about their first encounter with the Pari Center, David Peat. But of course, you know, for people who don't know, I'm his grandson. So I sort of grew up with him and the Pari Center. So just wanted to share my essay, which sort of shows that. And it's called David, Nono, and I. So it begins. Most people are raised Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or atheist. As for myself, I feel I was brought up a Bonian. Just as people cannot pinpoint when they first heard the words God or Allah, I cannot recall when I first discovered the works and life of David Bohm. The prime reason is because I was raised in an environment where I inevitably heard about this natural philosopher's work in a small Tuscan village called Pari, where my family had settled. Hearing Bohm's name wasn't as normal to me as hearing the church bells ring for Mass on Sunday. This was because my grandfather, David Peat. From my point of view as a child, I remember that 3 times a year, English-speaking people would come to the village, disappear for a couple of hours during the morning and afternoon, and all meet for dinner in the small village hall at my grandparents' house, where we would eat and talk. They would ask questions like, what do you want to do when you grow up? They would give me riddles and math problems, or just talk to me about the basics of physics, astronomy, psychology, or other interesting math games. I never questioned these occurrences because it was just normal life to me. Living in a small community where no one spoke English, I just thought that my family was just being very hospitable to English-speaking visitors. That they just wanted to talk to them and get to know them as they wanted to get to know us. It was later on that I realized that they actually had come to visit my grandfather or the Pari Center, which my grandparents had founded and where my grandfather taught. I enjoyed these conversations we had at mealtime so much that I would start setting up the coffee break and announcing when it was ready, as it gave me a chance to overhear what the visitors were discussing. To this day, I still believe that the best part of the Pari Center courses are the coffee breaks, not just because of the chocolate biscuits, but because it's when everyone gives their opinion, their point of view on the topic they discussed, or everyone just talks about something completely different, like their personal life story. As the years went by, I was allowed to sit on with some of these classes, discovering more about my grandfather's life, his work, and David Bohm and their philosophy. One thing I did realize, though, was that what I learned from these sessions wasn't the physics that everyone seemed to be doing. My physics education could be considered somehow backwards. Because of my conversations with people who came to the Pari Center, I knew about non-locality before I heard about the laws of motion. I knew about the twin paradox and general relativity before Newton's laws of gravity. My grandfather, when he was in the local pizzeria, would challenge me into solving equations before I even mastered the timetables. I'd work them out for him on the paper placemat. This did lead me to some confusion. For example, I didn't understand how equations can have 2 solutions, but it did get me interested in physics because I knew that physics wasn't just the apple always falls in this amount of time because it falls from this height, at this speed, but it could have been unpredictable, probabilistic, and, well, odd. It was more like a puzzle than a prediction. Another thing I discovered about my grandfather's classes was that the modern physics I was learning wasn't standard physics. I was learning about the unconventional interpretation of quantum mechanics. My first realization was when in science class in high school, I would brag about to my teachers that my grandfather had worked with David Bohm, only to find out that they had never heard of him. I would mention the pilot wave, but again, the teachers would have no idea what I was talking about. It was at the Pari Center that I realized that what I was actually learning was a new way of looking at the universe. And that's when I realized that I needed to learn what the standard view was and understand what the differences were. At the Pari Center, I would slowly become interested in small topics and do some personal research on them. The first one that I really got interested in when I was 14 was the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean, a mathematical sequence that has been considered, has been considered from the early Pythagoreans as the proportion for beauty. Proportions that are found everywhere in nature, like seashells, pine cones, hurricanes, galaxies, etc. I showed my grandfather my research, and after a very short conversation, he proposed that I should talk about it in the upcoming course at the Pari Center. And so I did, and I think I made a good impression on him because it became a regular session for 3 years during the Pari Center courses. Then I decided that I was in need of a new topic of interest. And this, I don't mention it, but mainly because I didn't believe what I was talking about anymore. Luckily, that happened in 2016, a couple of weeks before my grandfather and the movie director Paul Howard gathered in Pari with some of the greatest minds that had worked with David Bohm to interview them and make a documentary on the life and work of the physicist. I remember I'd just come back from walking my grandfather's dog, and as always, we would chat for at least half an hour about our day, about movies, personal life. He would tell me story of his youth, or even, discuss ideas we were having and future plans. That day, though, we were discussing the documentary and who was coming to Pari and what they would be talking about. And all of a sudden, he asked, "So what are you going to talk about?" Basically, he wanted me to play a role in the documentary, but I didn't know what to say. And so he proposed that I should talk about how Bohm could influence young people if I couldn't think of anything else. After that evening, I spent time thinking about what I could say when interviewed, and I realized that I didn't actually know the specifics of Bohm's thought. I knew the feel of Bohm's physics, I knew about his idea of dialogue and language, but I couldn't really put it into words. When I was thinking about his work, I couldn't pinpoint what he said. It was more like a state of mind, a different train of thought that distinguished him from other ideas. Bohm's work for me hadn't been a new interpretation of physics. It was a set of axioms to view the world. To me, Bohm had given me a new way of thinking, where everything wasn't static and followed laws, mainly because I didn't know what the laws he proposed. For me, it was more of a process, a constant becoming and transforming of every detail in the universe. The constant folding and unfolding of the implicate order into the explicate. And this reasoning didn't only apply in physics. But even if I now can put it into words, though I'm still struggling, I couldn't do it back then. So I went back to my grandfather and asked him to explain what Bohm actually said. The more I heard about his ideas, though, the more it sounded similar to a philosopher that I'd been studying in school, Hegel. I write about Bohm and Hegel, which we don't need to get into now. But basically, after making this comparison with my grandfather, he got to the phone to Paul Howard, and they made a space for my interview during the filming. And after that, he proposed that I should substitute my talk on beauty and mathematics with the talk on Hegel and Bohm. Later, I was talking to Basil Hiley, Bohm's long-term colleague, about David Bohm's exile to Brazil and the United States during the McCarthy witch hunts. And, because Bohm had attended a few Marxist meetings. But Basil explained how Bohm had only joined for a short time, and it wasn't really the Marxist political view that interested him, it was more the philosophy. In fact, Bohm used to travel carrying Hegel's Science of Logic. Both Marx and Hegel followed the philosophical current of idealism and the idea of the dialectic, the flowing process of history, where two ideas, when they clash, create a further idea that includes, yet supersedes, what went before. When he said that, I smiled because Hegel's book that Bohm carried around is where the philosopher points out the foundation of his philosophy that compared to his work. So in 2017, I went to the EMQM conference in London in honor of David Bohm. There, again, I was surrounded by great minds who gave talks about him and also showed how his work is not dormant, but there is research going on, both in London, Canada, following his spirit. As my grandfather had passed away earlier in the year, my role was to represent him at this conference, not as a speaker, but just as a presence. It was a shock to me when chatting to people who I did not know, when I introduced myself and my relationship to Pete and Bohm, how many people were pleased to meet me. Some had met my grandfather, some had come to the Pari Center, some had just read one of Pete's books, and some had written a book because of him. And with huge excitement, they wanted to talk to me. The reason why I was shocked wasn't just because I felt a bit of a celebrity, but because I realized how many people my grandfather had touched, just in relation to Bohm. I know my grandfather was, some may say, a preacher and teacher of Bohm's ideas, but I also know that he had worked on other ideas of his own, such as gentle action, synchronicity, film and reality, relationship between science, art, and the sacred, and many other fields. And because of his work with Bohm, so many people had come to me, a university student from a small town of Italy, full of excitement and glad of my interest in Bohm. This event made me extremely grateful to my grandfather, not because of all the opportunities and encouragement he had given me, even after his passing, but because of all of his ideas and the way he had touched, changed, and helped so many people, creating followers of his own words all over the world. And I'm proud of being part of that spirit and that legacy that he had created during his life. And I finish with this quote that he gives in an interview with Cruz Sabadini, Shantina's partner. David Peat says, "We are not concerned with finding laws of nature. We are concerned with looking for something beautiful."
Beautiful. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you, everyone. We're coming at the end of our time together, and so we want to do that with a good sound.
No, don't do that. Give him a trigger warning.
Okay. So we wanted to make a toast to David Peat's life and work, to all the stories we've heard, to the Pari Center, who's been doing this work for 20 years and is intending to do it for a long time more. Thank you for all your stories. I'm sure there's many more in there. And we kind of think that most of you are members or friends of the Pari Center. And so you will receive the amazing Pari perspectives that is coming up, that is specifically for the 20 years birthday, with lots of the stories, and you've heard some of them this evening. If you are not a member, then this could be a moment to consider it, because those stories are pretty amazing. And I think it's going to be a collector's item, that Pari perspectives. But so that will appear soon. It is in its creation process. Yeah, and there's one special thing we wanted to do, also announce for the members, which is that we're going to create a space for you to meet and have conversation with each other. It's an online platform called Sutra, and we're going to create a circle specifically for the friends of the Pari Center, so that you can exchange stories, get to know each other, exchange resources if you so wish. Right? It's really just a possibility, because not everybody likes online platforms. So just know we will do anything to meet again in this piazza with an amazing pazza and a good glass of wine. But as long as the world is the way it is, we have Sutra and these calls. So with that, thank you so much for being here and celebrating with all of us and bringing in your stories. And we hope to see you again for another day.
That was champagne.
Yeah,
That is so Pari.
fantastical.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Good job, everyone.
Oh, very much.
See you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Thank you all for being here.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Hope to see you guys here soon, guys and gals. Cheers. Oh, did we cheers?
Cheers. Oh, this is good. To all of you.
To all of you.
Well, that was so